Welcome back, traders and investors. We have an author on today. We have Larry Doyle, who's the managing partner at DM Income Advisor, and he is the author of Sense on Sense. Larry, how you doing this morning?
Doing fine. Doing fine. Thanks very much for having me on. We're having some more snow back here outside of New York. So what else is new, right?
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of tired of that white stuff around here, but maybe we'll get a break. Just quickly before we go into your book and your experiences on
Sure.
Wall Street, can you just give us a little bit of your education and your market background?
Sure. I'm a graduate of Holy Cross. Got out of Holy Cross. I guess I'm dating myself here in 1983, so it's hard to believe it's been almost 31 years.
Was Gordy Lockbaum there?
Gordy got out. What did he get out? 5 or 6 years after I did. He was a player.
Yep, sure was.
Yep. So yeah, graduate of Holy Cross. Came immediately to Wall Street. Probably didn't appreciate it at the time, but got a great opportunity to go to work for Larry Fink at First Boston. Stayed at First Boston on their mortgage trading desk for 7 years. That was my entree into the mortgage business. I traded mortgages for 15 years and then moved into sales and sales management. After close to 25 years, I left J.P. Morgan. I don't know if it was divine intervention or not. Perhaps it could have been. Left J.P. Morgan in 2006 and have been involved in writing, asset management, and now my own investment management practice, for about the last 6 years.
So all those years on Wall Street, what was the most important lesson you learned?
Well, you know what? There are so many lessons. The education is enormous. The learning curve is virtually straight up. But when I think back to all the lessons that I learned, specifically in regards to the markets and trading, rule number one always is don't fight the Fed.
Okay, well that's a familiar theme here. So that
certainly. Aside from that, though, I always wanted to have an appreciation for fundamentals, technicals, and psychology. And I would see a lot of traders and investors who would focus on one of those without having an appreciation for another one of those factors. But overriding, don't fight the Fed was always rule number one.
All right, so let's just jump into that then. And so, what's your outlook on the Fed right now? They don't seem to be. They seem to be very accommodating. The statements last week with Janet Yellen, she just kind of wants the tow helicopter Ben, policy there. So you're still bullish at these elevated levels then, if we're not fighting the Fed.
The issue here becomes, I think if we looked at the timing of the taper, I think that certainly coincided with Bernanke's exit of the Fed. I think Ben Bernanke very much wanted to be on record and have as part of his legacy, okay, I brought you into this this grand experiment known as QE, and as part of my record, I started that unwind as well. Not finished, certainly not finished. We're a long way from being finished, but that he started it, so that 30, 40, 50 years from now, when the history books are written, he will have that as part of his legacy. So now the question becomes, how does Miss Yellen continue this tapering process? That's a great unknown, but I think that is ultimately the manner in which she handles the tapering process. To me, is the biggest question facing the markets, not only this year, but probably for the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about your book, Sense on Sense. We in our Options House chat room, we got a lot of conspiracy theorists here, and just tell us about your book.
Well, the Sense on Sense is actually the title of my blog, and I launched that blog in early '09. Simply because there was so much to write about and I wanted to have a voice. The blog, Sense on Sense, led to the writing of my book. The title of the book is In Bed with Wall Street. And the book just came out a month ago. But really, it goes back to why did I launch the blog and what did I learn? I having come out of the mortgage space, I understood what happened. Okay, and I think most people understood why this happened. It's, massive amount of greed and excessive leverage within mortgages. But what really intrigued me was how did this happen? Meaning specifically, where were the regulators and how did the industry either get around or engage the regulators? And that was was really intrigued by that. And from very early on, I watched the confirmation hearing of Mary Shapiro, and it was like going down into a rabbit hole. Before I knew it, I found myself in the Grand Canyon, and in the process of doing that, I unearthed and exposed what I consider to be significant, scandalous behaviors, ultimately leading to, meaningful corruption within the regulatory system. And that's not just my assessment. Those are the assessments of people whom I engaged, interviewed, who worked both inside the industry as well as within the regulatory system. And it's a fascinating, revealing expose. And I felt ultimately compelled to write it because, to me, these are the greatest risks in the market.
Okay, so in your opinion, if there was, so this whole financial crisis could have been avoided then. If there wasn't so much corruption and so much inner workings, then we might have been able to avoid the whole thing.
Well, in my opinion, the senior executives on Wall Street, along with their friends in Washington, exchanged so much money and protection so that it neutralized, if not corrupted, the regulatory system. So ultimately, this is why I call it a conspiracy, is that, perhaps it wasn't this is exactly what we're going to do, but the end result was very much the same, that the regulators failed to uphold. So now we've got this massive debate. Oh, we need more regulation. Others, no, less regulation. In my opinion, what we need are appropriate regulations, which would mean in certain areas more regulation, in other areas less regulation. But what we really need are real regulators. And that's where I think right now the real concern is we don't have real regulators upholding the integrity of the markets.
All right. So, in your opinion, we're not really taking the necessary steps to avoid another crisis?
No, we're not. And I get, why do I maintain that? I personally do not believe that a self-regulatory model, which is largely how Wall Street is regulated, primarily through FINRA, I just don't think that is that really works to protect the interests of investors. And that's not my opinion. That is based upon overwhelming amount of documentation and references, which I include in my book. As reviewers have called it, the book, the case that I make is unassailable.
Okay, and so what steps need to be taken? We got to get rid of the regulators. We need a whole new.
No. I lay out 14 specific reforms in the book. The immediate reforms are the need for increased disclosures and transparency in the in the system. More information for the benefit of investors in terms of just investment offerings to drill down, the ability to assess risks. Transparency is the great disinfectant. But ultimately, what are other things that I think that need to happen in order to bring information out? I think we need significant whistleblower protections. There were whistleblowers on Wall Street who were willing to come forth. And I highlight personal stories where these whistleblowers were ignored, intimidated, or fired. Those were whistleblowers both inside the industry as well as within the regulators. That's just wrong. So I think we should fold the self-regulator into the SEC. And people would say, well, why the hell would you do that? The SEC, is largely incompetent. But I would only do that in concert with what I would define as a financial regulatory review board. Ultimately, what's our problem? We've got a total failure of leadership, both from Washington and Wall Street. And so I think we need to find some, real financial statesmen. Guys like William Black and Bill Isaac and Simon Johnson. Now, again, this may be viewed as a reach, but I put these ideas out there for purposes of debate and discussion. Just let's expose the scandalous behaviors so that we can actually have meaningful discussion.
Okay, so if we have a potential, another doomsday scenario, and then on the other hand, you have an accommodated Fed here. What?
Yep.
Yeah. What do you? What do you?
What do you do, right?
Yeah. What do you do?
Well, in the short term, I think the Fed is certainly reigning supreme. But how long how long? I mean, they've got a $4 or $4+ trillion balance sheet. The question now begs, how long can they, continue to maintain that approach? And so clearly they're trying to buy time, kick the can down the road, regain some traction. But what we don't have, the Fed doesn't control, the central banks overseas as well. Clearly, I mean, we're seeing the Bank of Japan, implement a new policy in terms of lending. That just came out last week. So we've got global central banks that are accommodative, but how long? My concern always is leverage. Where's the leverage in the system? So we've got massive, leverage in the central banking system now. But what about some of the shadow banks, especially overseas? A concern that I have is in the shadow banking system over in the People's Republic in China. That represents, I think, last I looked, up 35, maybe 40% of the credit that's going into their economy. Are they taking a page out of our book in terms of lax oversight and regulation? Yeah, I think that maybe our model, our system would look like to be a model, perhaps compared to theirs. So these are kind of the unknowns that I think ultimately impact our markets. I mean, so we'll see.
Okay, now we kind of had a divergence going on here in the gold market. Usually, when you have a rally like we've had a creeper rally off the lows here, usually the money is coming out of the gold market. But in this scenario here, you've had gold and the market, moving up, moving up together here. Is this symptomatic of people getting nervous on an international scale here, or is it just kind of?
Well, in my opinion, now the move, in my opinion, coincided with Miss Yellen coming on board at the Fed, and she, from a historical standpoint, she's known as a dove. I mean, not that Ben Bernanke is by any means a hawk, but certainly not. But Yellen, I think, is always known as dovish, and
right.
I think that the move in gold was directly correlated with her initial testimony and coming on board, and so that's what I think there. But the gold market, to me, though, it's always tough to get a handle around. It just seems to get that trade seems to get very crowded.
Okay, so you think this ends badly, or just the fact you just kicked the can down the road forever?
Ultimately, the bill comes due, right? And so the question is, how quickly and how large does the bill come due? And the issues that we've got are structural in nature, whether it's from a regulatory standpoint or an economic standpoint. And these issues need to be addressed. And we've got this serious slack in the labor market. I mean, clearly Yellen highlighted that. And that's what she's looking at. It's not inconceivable that we end up with, a 5 to 5.5% unemployment rate, and the Fed's going to continue to remain dovish simply because of the large numbers of people who aren't even in the labor pool or in the labor force. So, and this again makes it problematic because how do you determine, okay, what is the Fed going to do? So these are all new challenges. We're in uncharted waters, but I think for the time being, the market's probably okay. But I look, when's the last time that we had actually a formal correction, a 10% pullback? I think it's been approaching close to 2 years now.
Yeah, we had that little one a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, and we bounced
right back. Yeah, I mean,
back.
That was, 5% or thereabouts?
Right, right.
I don't think we've had a 10% pullback since spring of 2012, I believe.
Right.
So that to me seems, I mean, if we're not getting a little long in the tooth, I certainly think that we're approaching it. But, I think that if we were to get a 5% or even a 10% pullback, honestly, it'll probably be met with cash, and that the market will probably move sideways. But ultimately, again, with the Fed tapering, I mean, what happens if by the end of this year, they actually did maintain the program and they're done with it? I mean, I have a hard time believing that the market would be at these current levels if the Fed were to say, you know what,
we're done.
QE, we're done.
Yeah. Okay. And what about just getting a little bit into like marker structure and it's just high frequency trading? Do you pose that as as a threat to this market? I
Oh,
mean,
very, very much so. And it's interesting. A relatively new commissioner at the SEC, a woman by the name of Kara Stein, just last week, well, maybe it was 10 days or so ago, at an equity trading conference, highlighted that the structural issues of the equities markets as an issue that needs to get addressed. I think the SEC ushered in the current structure in the equity markets without a full appreciation as to how they were doing it. And I think the market's structure has raced way ahead of the SEC's capabilities to oversee it. And so now the SEC is trying to play catch up, and that certainly bears watching. In that same talk, Commissioner Stein said, we also need to take a look at Wall Street self-regulator, FINRA. So these are issues that they're not going to be corrected overnight, but this is stuff that I look at very closely because to me it just represents underlying structural issues that present risks that I don't believe people fully understand or appreciate.
Okay, so like no two crises looks the same, right? You always have something else, tipping the iceberg. So just what could you've mentioned a couple other things. Is there anything else here that could trigger the next one?
Again, to me it always comes back to leverage. What do they? As one of my trading friends said, the road to hell is paved with positive carry, and in terms of leverage. So I'm always trying to keep a pulse on where is the excess of leverage. Now, okay, we're not going to get a central bank to quickly pull the plug, but as they slow down, and that's why I look at leverage in the dark corners of the market, and I think that China, especially, it's tough to get a look in there because I don't see a tremendous amount of significant research into that space, but the little bit that I do see, it's like, this looks to be kind of problematic. And if you got some hiccups there, and you get, we had a whiff of to some dislocations in EM. To those who were trading those markets, it was more than a whiff. I mean, that was pretty painful. But if you get a concerted exit from selected emerging markets, I mean, there's nothing the Federal Reserve can do.
Okay, all right. We've had Larry Doyle on, managing partner at DM Incan Advisors, author of his blog Sense on Sense, and also his book for us conspiracy theorists out there, In Bed with Wall Street. Thank you, Larry. It's really good to get a different perspective. We have a lot of traders here looking at daily fluctuations in the market, but it's not often that we put together all the macros and all the different facts that you analyze in your blog, in your books and stuff. Thanks a lot for coming on. I hope you can dig yourself out of that snow, and certainly like to have you back on the show again.
Guys, thanks very much for having me on. Have a great day.
Okay, thanks, Larry.
Appreciate it. Yep, bye-bye.